Let me ask you a question that sounds simple and feels uncomfortable. If I took 100 people at age 25, put them on the same street, gave them the same starting money, the same general intelligence, the same broad access to work, and then checked back 40 years later, how many of them do you think would have built real wealth? Not temporary income, not surface success. Not a life that looked fine from outside while the inside was held together by timing payments and private anxiety. I mean real wealth, the kind that buys time, the kind that removes fear, the kind that lets a person look at the economy and feel choice instead of threat. Very few that has always haunted me, because the difference is rarely one giant mistake. It is not usually one disaster. One foolish trade, one spectacular collapse, one stupid gamble, or one wild act of recklessness that explains the gap between the one who becomes strong and the 95, who remains strained, dependent, or quietly disappointed. The real explanation is far less dramatic. Poverty usually enters life as erosion, not as an explosion. That is the mother line of everything I am about to tell you. Most people do not get kept poor by one catastrophic decision. They get kept poor by a silent erosion system running in the background of ordinary days for 30 or 40 years. That is why it is so dangerous. Because the erosion does not announce itself, it feels normal. It feels reasonable. It feels like what adults do. It feels like being realistic, staying busy, treating yourself, waiting for a better moment, staying safe, fitting in, not making a fool of yourself, not taking silly risks, living like the people around you, postponing difficult changes until life is calmer. And that is exactly how the structure gets eaten. I want you to hold one image in your mind as we go through this. Picture a large house with beautiful walls, clean windows, good furniture, and calm neighbors around it. From the street, the house looks stable. Nothing seems wrong. Guests arrive and compliment the place. The owner walks through it every day and sees nothing alarming. But under the floorboards, behind the plaster, inside the unseen parts of the frame, something quiet is at work. Not a wrecking ball, not a fire, not a storm, small unseen erosion. Each day too minor to fear. Each month too ordinary to discuss. Each year easy to explain away. Then one morning the wall gives people, call it sudden. It was never sudden. That is how financial lives collapse. I learned long ago that if you want to understand outcomes, you do not study speeches, you do not study intentions, you do not study what people say they care about in January, you study what they do on random Tuesdays when nobody is watching and no crisis is forcing honesty. Show me the shape of a person's ordinary day and I can tell you a great deal about the shape of his financial future. That is because wealth and poverty are not only economic states, they are habits of direction. The rich are not always more moral, they are not always more intelligent, they are not always more deserving, but they are very often running a different set of repeated behaviors, one that protects compounding instead of silently interrupting it. The poor and the financially trapped are not always making loud errors. Often they are allowing 7 quiet forces to work against them every week without realizing the price. I have spent most of my life watching those forces. The first one is comfort. This is the first mechanism. I call it the comfort cage. People do not usually wake up one morning and decide to become stagnant. They settle, quietly, gradually, respectably. They find a job that is safe enough. They find a routine that is predictable enough. They stay because leaving would be uncomfortable. They delay the business idea, the skills shift, the hard conversation, the request for more responsibility, the move to a better city, the change in circle, the serious study. The second income stream, the leap that could have altered their trajectory, not because the move is impossible, but because the discomfort of changing feels larger than the discomfort of staying exactly where they are. That is how the cage is built, not with chains, with softness. Comfort is one of the most misunderstood forces in economic life. People think poverty comes from pain. Sometimes it does, but more often stagnation comes from moderate comfort. The pain is not sharp enough to force change. The days are not bad enough to provoke rebellion. The paycheck still arrives. The weekends still happen. The dinners out still make the month feel manageable. The self can still say, things are not that bad. That sentence has buried more futures than people realize. I have seen intelligent, capable, decent people remain in places far beneath their potential because the current life was just stable enough to delay courage. They did not need a miracle. They needed a stronger relationship with discomfort. The wealthiest serious builders I have known were not fearless. They were simply trained to move in the presence of uncertainty. They understood that waiting to feel fully safe before acting is one of the cleanest ways to remain average forever. When I bought my first stock as a boy, I did not feel ready. Ready is a word people overuse when what they really mean is guaranteed. There is no guarantee. There is only the decision to move while fear is still in the room. That is what the comfort cage steals. Not only action, it steals the willingness to act before certainty gives permission. The person trapped in comfort tells himself a flattering story. He says he is being practical, mature, careful, responsible. Those words can be true. They can also be disguises. If 10 years pass and the person is still standing in the same cautious place, still feeding the same employer, still dreaming privately about a different life, while publicly explaining why now is not the time, then responsibility is no longer the right word. It is surrender with better manners. That is why comfort is so expensive. It does not usually ruin you in a visible act. It keeps your life from changing while telling you that your caution is wisdom. Now, once comfort wins, the next force enters almost automatically: busyness. This is the second mechanism. I call it urgency theater. One of the most destructive lies in modern life is that motion means progress. People race from one demand to another, one notification to another, one meeting, one deadline, one request, one crisis, one little fire, one reactive act after another. And at the end of the week, they feel exhausted enough to believe they must have accomplished something important. Usually they have only served urgency. Urgency and importance are not the same thing. I learned long ago that if you want to build wealth, you must become loyal to things that are important long before they become urgent: reading, thinking, skill building, relationship building, studying businesses, understanding tax rules, reviewing spending, improving your earning power, building small systems, learning about investing. These things rarely shout. That is why most people neglect them. The phone call shouts, the email shouts, the meeting shouts, the broken thing shouts, the bill shouts, the account login shouts, the algorithm shouts, the future rarely shouts. That is what makes urgency theater so powerful. It convinces people they are doing life because life feels noisy enough to require full attention. Meanwhile, the quiet tasks that could actually change the next 10 years sit untouched because they never achieve the emotional volume of the immediate. I have spent a huge percentage of my life reading in rooms most modern people would consider unnervingly still. To them it looks unproductive. To me it was compounding. The world pays richly for deep, quiet preparation and almost nothing for frantic, unrewarding activity. But it does that payment on a delayed schedule. Most people never last long enough to collect. The woodcutter with the dull axe says he has no time to sharpen it because he is busy cutting. Modern life is full of people living exactly that joke and calling it adulthood. They are too busy earning to learn how to earn more, too busy consuming to learn how to invest, too busy reacting to begin building, too busy proving. They are hardworking to notice they have become servants of urgency. This is why the urgency theater is a poverty habit. It keeps the mind in permanent defense mode, and a mind in permanent defense mode rarely builds anything beyond the next week. Now, even if a person escapes the comfort cage and urgency theater, another force still shapes him every day. Environment. This is the third mechanism. I call it the proximity gravity. People are not nearly as independent as they like to imagine. Your standards, your sense of normal, your expectations about money, your appetite for risk, your view of what is possible, your tolerance for debt, your willingness to read, your style of conversation, your emotional temperature around ambition, all of this gets shaped by the people and environments you live near long before you develop a philosophy about it. That is why proximity matters so much. If the people around you treat debt as routine, upgrading as natural, investing as strange, patience as boring, and serious long-term thinking as a personality defect, then you will feel social friction every time you try to behave differently. Not because those people are evil, because they are normalizing a frame. Normal is powerful. I stayed in Omaha for reasons many people misunderstood. They thought the center of intelligent finance must be somewhere louder, busier, more self-important, more connected to the daily theater of markets. I preferred distance because distance protected judgment. Noise does not merely inform people, it trains them. The crowd begins thinking in one rhythm, one frame, one style of reaction. I have always preferred clearer air. The same is true personally. If your closest circle constantly performs consumer success, gossips about other people, makes excuses for stagnation, and treats every ambitious move as suspicious or unrealistic, then your internal sense of normal will bend toward that gravity. Environment always wins in the long run unless you design against it deliberately. This does not mean abandoning everyone you love. It means understanding that exposure is never neutral. Books are exposure, podcasts are exposure, friends are exposure, mentors are exposure, rooms are exposure, cities are exposure, industries are exposure. The people you hear most often become the architects of what feels plausible inside your own head. Most people never choose this deliberately. They simply remain where they are. That is why proximity is so dangerous. It operates without requiring your consent. You can wake up at 45 and discover that your ambitions quietly shrank to fit the emotional climate of the people around you. That is not fate, that is gravity. Now let us move to a force that sounds trivial and ruins lives precisely because it sounds trivial. Invisible spending. This is the fourth mechanism. I call it the leakage pattern. In plumbing, a slow leak rarely announces itself. It drains, that is all, day after day, week after week. By the time the damage is obvious, the loss is already history. Money leaves lives the same way, not only through large disasters, through invisible leakage, subscriptions forgotten because remembering would require effort, daily purchases that feel too small to matter, delivery habits, convenience inflation, upgrades that become standard faster than gratitude can catch them. The steady widening of the lifestyle every time income rises, the little emotional purchases after hard days, the recurring stories people tell themselves about why they deserve it this time. None of these are theatrical. That is why they are devastating. Every dollar that leaks is not merely a dollar gone. It is a dollar that could have become more than itself if protected long enough. That is what ordinary people keep failing to feel. Spending does not only remove the current dollar, it removes the future tree attached to that dollar. I have lived in the same house since the late 1950s. People have made a whole mythology out of choices like that, as if modesty itself were the story. That is too superficial. The real principle is opportunity cost. Every large recurring expense should be measured not only by what it costs this month, but by what it prevents from compounding over time. The house too large for your actual needs. The car payment designed to flatter your self-image. The luxury habit that became an identity marker. The recurring outflows you stopped noticing because they became part of the wallpaper. That is leakage. The public sees income and thinks wealth. I look at keep rate. How much remains after the social performance of adulthood has finished making its claims? The leakage pattern is not solved through shame. Shame is not a useful budgeting tool. It is solved through visibility. Track every dollar for a month, and the truth becomes difficult to romanticize. People do not need more guilt. They need clearer eyes. Most have a vague story about their spending that protects their identity better than it protects their future. Once the leaks are seen, choices become possible again, and once money leaks less, another force becomes visible underneath it. Identity itself. This is the fifth mechanism. I call it the borrowed self. One of the saddest financial realities I have observed is how many people spend to maintain a version of themselves that was never really theirs. The apartment, the neighborhood, the shoes, the car, the vacations, the visible upgrades, the tech, the dinners, the markers of arrival. These things stop being simple purchases. They become external proof. Proof to friends, proof to parents, proof to peers, proof to people online, proof to the self that progress is happening. That is the borrowed self. A person starts financing an image because he wants the image to speak before the substance exists. This is one of the most expensive habits in adult life. If your scorecard lives outside you, then your money decisions become performances. You buy not because the thing serves your values, but because it helps manage perception. That perception may be social, romantic, professional, or internal. It does not matter. The mechanism is the same. Money becomes a costume department. I have always preferred the internal scorecard. Not because it sounds noble, because it is cheaper and more durable. If you need applause to confirm who you are, your lifestyle will always be financially vulnerable to the audience. If you know who you are without the spending, then money can finally become a tool instead of a mirror. This is why conspicuous consumption is not merely vulgar. It is structurally weakening. It turns capital into theater. It buys attention instead of freedom. And because the culture rewards visible proof, many people keep mistaking the most expensive path for the most impressive one. The truly financially powerful people I have known often look plain from the street, not because modesty is automatically virtuous, but because security does not need a costume. The person who must constantly display success is often compensating for an internal scorecard that has never learned how to rest. That makes every downturn worse, because if your identity is financed, recession does not just threaten your money, it threatens your story about yourself. Now, we come to a habit that feels hopeful and is often simply passivity in better clothing. This is the sixth mechanism. I call it the miracle script. There are many versions of it: the lottery ticket, the big score, the one stock, the one sudden break. The idea that one moment, one lucky shift, one external event will do the heavy lifting that slow, disciplined action has been postponing. Sometimes the miracle script looks crude. Sometimes it looks very respectable. Endless preparation, constant consuming of advice, moving from one opportunity to another, waiting for the perfect entry, waiting for the right market, waiting for conditions to settle, waiting for the perfect time to start. All of it comes from the same emotional root. I want wealth without enduring the ordinary repetition that usually builds it. That is what the miracle script really means. It is lottery thinking in expensive language. I started investing at 11, and I have often said, I wish I had started even earlier. That statement confuses people because they think I am talking about a specific stock or secret insight. I am not. I am talking about time. Compounding is not magical because it is dramatic. It is magical because it is patient. The miracle is not the stroke of luck. The miracle is what happens when small, sensible actions are allowed to live for very long periods without interruption. Most people cannot tolerate that shape of progress, so they keep looking for the shortcut. The problem is not only that shortcuts often fail, the deeper problem is that while waiting for the shortcut, they are not quietly building anything real. The miracle script keeps people passive while letting them feel optimistic enough not to change. That is why it is so dangerous. It disguises inaction as possibility. I do not object to hope. I object to hope that replaces process. The people who become wealthy almost never do so because fate finally noticed them. They become wealthy because repeated sensible decisions accumulated while others were still preparing emotionally for one extraordinary escape. And now we arrive at the seventh and deepest habit. This is the one that locks all the others together. I call it the tomorrow fraud. Tomorrow is the most expensive word in personal finance. I will start tomorrow. I will get serious next month. I will automate after this busy period. I will pay the debt down when things calm down. I will learn about investing once life is less stressful. I will stop spending like this when I have more breathing room. I will read that book, start that account, make that change, ask for that raise, move toward that better circle. Look at the numbers honestly. Later is the shelter of the unchanged life. The tomorrow fraud works because it does not feel like a lie. It feels like prudence, like planning, like maturity. But almost always, it is just delay with nicer language. And delay is not neutral. Delay is compounding in the wrong direction. Time is passing while you are not planting. That is the real cost. I have often said the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. The tomorrow fraud forges those chains one easy postponement at a time. Each instance is small enough to forgive. Together they become a life. This is why I think the best time to begin almost anything financially important is earlier than you want and less elegantly than you imagined. You start before you feel fully ready, you automate before you have the perfect spreadsheet, you invest before the headlines sound calm, you cut spending before the future becomes an emergency, you learn before your job is threatened, you reduce debt before rates rise. You change your environment before your old one fully approves. That is adulthood, not waiting for perfect conditions, beginning under imperfect ones. Now, once you can see these 7 mechanisms clearly, the next question becomes practical. What do you do? I do not believe insight alone changes lives. Insight without structure becomes another form of entertainment. So here is the sequence I would use. First, awareness for 1 week. Do not try to be better, just observe. Watch where comfort wins. Watch how urgency steals your hours. Watch who you spend time around and what they normalize. Watch every dollar that leaks. Watch which purchases are really identity performances. Watch where you are still waiting for a break instead of building. Watch how often tomorrow appears in your inner language. Do not judge, collect evidence. Second, friction. Make the destructive habits harder and the constructive ones easier. Remove your card from the phone if impulse spending owns you. Put investing and saving on automatic rails. Create a little inconvenience between your urge and your money. Put books in reach and friction around noise. Unfollow people who sell borrowed identity. Seek more exposure to people and ideas that normalize long-term building. Small friction changes lives. Most people underestimate this because they are still trying to become heroic instead of becoming well-designed. Third, compounding. Once the systems are in place, your main job is not to keep reinventing yourself. It is to stop interrupting the machine. Let the transfers happen. Let the account grow. Let the debt shrink. Let the reading accumulate. Let the skills deepen. Let the circle improve. Let the process become normal enough that you no longer need to negotiate with yourself every week. This is where temperament becomes more important than brilliance. Fourth, leverage. Only after the first 3 stages are working does life begin to accelerate. In a way people around you will call lucky. Investments start mattering, reputation begins to open doors. A better environment lifts your baseline. The invisible years become visible. The person who looked quiet and restrained suddenly looks powerful, but nothing sudden happened. The 7 termites stopped eating. The structure was finally allowed to harden. That is the whole framework. Not mystical behavioral, slow, unpopular, real. Let me gather it cleanly. The comfort cage keeps you in known mediocrity. Urgency theater keeps you reacting. Instead of building, proximity gravity shrinks what feels possible. The leakage pattern drains your future one unnoticed habit at a time. The borrowed self spends to maintain a performance. The miracle script keeps you waiting for one big break instead of stacking small disciplined wins. The tomorrow fraud turns delay into a life strategy. That is why most people remain poor or financially fragile. Not because they are cursed, because these 7 forces are running quietly in the background while everyone tells them their problem is simply income, luck, or timing. Those things matter, but behavior compounds faster than excuses. I want to end where I began. If I followed you for 30 days, not listening to your dreams, not listening to your intentions, not listening to your opinions about money, but simply watching what you actually do with your time, your attention, your environment, and your dollars. What future would I see taking shape? That is the only question that matters. If the answer is encouraging, then keep going. If the answer is uncomfortable, good discomfort is not condemnation. It is a map. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. The same is true of every financial life worth building, not tomorrow. Today